Imagine a world where only the strongest survive, where competition reigns over cooperation and the powerful dictate the rules for everyone else. That's right, we live in that world. This idea, the law of the jungle, is rooted in nature and has shaped human society for thousands of years. Though human civilization has developed laws, ethics, and systems of social fairness, this primal rule is far from gone. In fact, it's still an active, if subtle, influence on how our societies work, and understanding it helps us see the reasons behind both the success and suffering we encounter every day. Let's start with what the law of the jungle really means. In nature, it's a rule of survival where the fittest animals thrive and the weakest often fall prey. In human society, it's not always as literal, but we see it reflected in social, political, and economic structures where those with more power, influence, or resources tend to rise to the top, while others struggle. This natural order of power dynamics shapes everything from the rise and fall of nations to the division between rich and poor. Throughout history, human societies have built systems that seem to mirror this natural law. Think of ancient empires, for instance. Powerful civilizations like the Roman Empire or the Mongol Empire conquered weaker nations to build vast territories, amassing wealth and resources. This wasn't done out of malice, but because the empires needed resources to thrive, and the easiest way to get them was to overpower others. These empires became rich and powerful through military strength, but the smaller, weaker nations paid the price, often in the form of subjugation and loss of their culture. A similar pattern emerges in the medieval feudal system. During the Middle Ages in Europe, society was structured around a hierarchy where lords and monarchs owned most of the land and resources. Common people, like peasants or serfs, worked the land but had very few rights or social mobility. They relied on the lords for protection, but they were essentially bound to the land and had limited means to improve their lives. This inequality was so deeply ingrained that it became the standard structure of society for centuries. The wealthy and powerful maintained their position, often passing it down through generations, while the commoners continued to serve. Fast forward to the age of colonialism, and the pattern only grew more pronounced. European powers expanded across the globe, conquering territories and exploiting local populations for their resources. Whether through the enslavement of people, extraction of natural resources, or cultural domination, the colonizers wielded their technological and military superiority to dominate societies that were less developed in these areas. This created vast inequalities, not only within colonized territories, but across continents, with the colonizers growing wealthy at the expense of the colonized. You'd think that with modern advancements in democracy, social justice, and global cooperation, we would have outgrown the law of the jungle by now. But it's still very much alive, just in different forms. Take economic inequality, for example. Today we see giant corporations, especially in the tech world, holding enormous power. Companies like Amazon, Google, and Apple dominate their respective industries to the point that smaller businesses struggle to compete. Even within these corporations, the distribution of wealth is lopsided. Executives at the top enjoy vast fortunes, while lower-level employees often face stagnant wages and limited opportunities for advancement. This isn't all that different from a feudal system where a few people control the wealth and resources while the majority work without ever getting ahead. Social status also reflects this dynamic. In modern times, wealth, fame, and influence create hierarchies that mirror the primal rule of only the strongest survive. The wealthy have access to exclusive resources, better education, healthcare, and networking opportunities. They often shape the systems around them to maintain their advantages, from influencing politics to creating exclusive opportunities that remain out of reach for most people. Even in democracies, where everyone is supposed to have equal rights and opportunities, those with more influence tend to have the final say on important issues, from tax laws to education policies. Politically, the law of the jungle is also at work. Look at international relations, where countries with significant military or economic power often steer global policies and dictate terms to weaker nations. For instance, the United States or China has considerable influence over international trade, environmental agreements, and military alliances. They can impose sanctions, control market dynamics, and shape the world's economy. This power allows them to protect their interests, often at the expense of smaller countries that lack the resources to resist. Geopolitics is a continuous power struggle, with the strongest nations consistently emerging on top while others navigate carefully to avoid being overshadowed. So what does the future hold? Can we ever truly escape this primal system? In many ways, it's unlikely that the law of the jungle will ever completely disappear. Human nature is driven by survival instincts, ambition, and a desire for power, which means some form of this law will persist. Even as we advocate for equality and fairness, the reality is that resources will always be limited, and the distribution of power and wealth will never be completely even. This doesn't mean we're doomed to live in a purely cutthroat world forever. Society has made significant progress in reducing some of the harsher aspects of this law. Many countries now have systems in place to help the most vulnerable members of society, things like universal healthcare, social welfare programs, and free education. These don't eliminate inequality, but they offer a safety net that can prevent the worst consequences of the law of the jungle, where those without resources are completely left behind. There are also ways to lessen the law's impact by promoting ethical governance and transparency. When governments are transparent and inclusive, people can have more trust in the systems that govern them. Ethical policies and practices, especially around issues like fair wages, anti-corruption, and social justice, help distribute power more evenly, reducing the exploitation that would otherwise occur unchecked. In an ideal world, if we could somehow eliminate the law of the jungle entirely, we'd be looking at a society with absolute equality. Everyone would have equal access to resources, opportunities, and social standing. But complete equality is hard to imagine because it contradicts the very essence of competition, which has driven innovation and progress throughout history. Without the drive to excel, societies might lose their edge, becoming stagnant or complacent. In addition, not everyone in society wants or is suited for the same roles. Some people thrive as leaders or innovators, while others find fulfillment in different paths. Complete equality, without any differentiation in wealth, power, or influence, might ignore the value of these individual contributions. So, while the law of the jungle may never disappear, we can aim for a society that mitigates its worst effects. We can work toward more equitable systems, provide basic resources to everyone, and ensure that the distribution of power is as fair as possible. By doing this, we won't erase competition or ambition, but we can create a world where the benefits of competition do not come at the expense of the most vulnerable. After all, a balanced society doesn't just come from the strongest surviving, it comes from a collective effort to make sure everyone has a fair shot at thriving.